at the end of the day, it's a replica. It's not real. Anybody who knows anything about these cars knows that you're unlikely to ever see a real one in real life because they're so valuable and there's only 4 of them. So why not?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick, and greetings to all of you listening from places like Weirton, West Virginia, Milford, Michigan, Pacific Palisades, California, Wellington, Ontario, Canada, Tamworth, Australia, and Monza, Italy. Thanks for joining me, and if you're new to the podcast, welcome aboard. We talk about all kinds of stuff on the show, from the very early days of the motor car to today's hypercars. And I throw in motorcycles and even some aviation too, so lots of good stuff. But it's all about the people and stories behind the machines. You can also follow Horsepower Heritage on Instagram and YouTube. Plenty of good videos over there. And if you enjoy the show, share it with a friend and help me grow the audience. Today I've got a returning guest for you, and this guy is one of the most talented builders out there. Brandon Hegedus was on the show way back in episode 33 in August of 2021, and he was here to talk about the incredible Ferrari Tipo 156 Sharknose tribute that he built in his garage in Alberta, Canada. And if you're not familiar with that car, that's a Formula One car. It was the one that Phil Hill won the 1961 World Championship in, and Enzo Ferrari had all of those cars destroyed, so if you want one, a replica is really your only shot. Anyway, that project got Brandon a lot of attention, including a story in Road and Track magazine, and it's also led to other commissioned builds, as you're about to hear. So since Brandon is just finishing up on his latest masterpiece, I thought it would be a good time to bring him back on the show and talk about it. By the way, you can follow Brandon on Instagram. His handle is How Is That Street Legal, and I'm going to put that in the show notes for you. And wait till you see his build photos. It will blow you away. Before we get started, I want to ask you to support the show with a donation. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and throw a few bucks in the gas tank. It helps pay for the production of the show. That's 2 regular episodes a month and a few special episodes per year, which is a lot of great entertainment, and your support makes a big difference. For example, how about $12, just $1 per month? Not a lot of money, but if 20 of you did that, it pays for web hosting and some other recurring expenses for the whole year. So again, go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. Make a donation. It's easy and it feels good. All right, in a moment, I've got Brandon Hegedus and his latest creation. It's another Unobtainable Ferrari. It's just beautiful, and that's coming up right after this. Hi guys, Maurice Merrick here, and I want to let you know about 3 great scale models available right now at modelcitizendiecast.com. First, there's the pocket-size Lancia Stratos HF Stradale in 1/64th scale by Mini GT. Or how about a BMW 3.0 CS Coupe in 1/43rd scale by Mini Champs in your choice of 3 different colors. Or if American muscle is more your style, how about the 1968 Shelby GT500 convertible in great big 1/18th scale by Acme Trading Company. It's finished in Acapulco blue with white racing stripes, and boy oh boy, check out those mag wheels. You can find all of these and more at modelcitizendiecast.com. Use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout and get 10% off your order. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. Well, Brandon, I've been looking forward to this one because you've outdone yourself. I mean, this new build, 2 of them really.
Yeah.
Just so impressive. And
thank you.
Yeah, and so it's a fitting occasion to have you back on the show. You know, the Sharknose was so impressive, and I couldn't believe that anybody was crazy enough to do that, but it's certainly gotten you a lot of attention. So thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, I mean, where should we start? First of all, I think we should kind of give people a little bit about your background. Now, by trade, you're a cabinet maker, but you're also this like dyed-in-the-wool car guy.
Yeah.
And so now you have created a Ferrari 330 P4. Why don't you tell everyone what you just built?
well, so this is actually a 412P, technically. Okay. If you want to get really technical, I mean, they're kind of the same car, but This is technically a 412P. Yeah, so I built a full carbon-bodied P4 with a 5.5 V12 engine in the back, a ZFQ gearbox, correct Campagnola wheels, and yeah, it's a replica, but it's pretty dang close.
And how many genuine ones exist in the world?
There's 4 genuine ones that were built. And then, I'm not a historian really, but I mean, some of them started as P3s and then were converted to P4s and then converted to 412Ps and then back, so again, don't quote me on all of that, but yeah, it's essentially there's 4 of them, 4 real ones.
So Unobtainium worth, I mean, they're priceless. You're not going to find them on the street, but the car that you just built is going to be usable and reliable and
well, and that's the idea. I mean, that's what I love doing is taking an old car like this that's unobtainable and recreating it with modern materials and things, and then making it maintainable, making it reliable. You could drive it, you can change the oil, you can work on it yourself without breaking the bank, without needing a team of mechanics.
What did you say the powertrain was in this car?
This is a 5.5 Ferrari V12.
Okay.
So this engine came from a 456, Ferrari 456, similar engine to the 550 Maranello.
The basic sketch is tube frame chassis?
Yeah, so this car's got a full tube frame and originals as well. The original cars, actually, the chassis on the original cars were very stick figure-ish, very bird cagey. And when if you were to look at one fully stripped down, I mean, the tubing almost makes no sense. Everything is tiny. Everything is kind of 1 inch or 1.25 tube, very small. So this one is a lot beefier than that. It's a lot stronger for sure, and a lot more stable than an original chassis would have been.
Yeah, that's smart because after all, you have a customer who wants to use the car and not worry about it folding in half.
Yeah, of course.
But all of those, these are endurance racing cars, sports cars intended for high speed at Le Mans, and they weren't intended to last more than one season after all. So
no, and I've said to people too, these cars were built on Friday, painted on Saturday, raced on Sunday, and they were meant to be thrown in the garbage on Monday. I mean, obviously that's an exaggeration, but they lasted, and now today they're extremely rare and extremely valuable.
Yeah, and when you think about how they're built, and especially if you see one just as a chassis and without the bodywork, it is scary to think about driving it so fast. I mean, terrifying. When I look at all the photos, because I had hundreds and hundreds of photos to go through of stripped cars and vintage photos and things, and when you really look at what they were put together from, it's terrifying. When you think that these guys were doing 200 in these things, and in the dark, I mean, and even this car, I mean, trying to get into it is a challenge. Trying to get out of it is a challenge. There's no room in the car. It would be screamingly loud. It would be hot. I mean, the bravery or stupidity, maybe it was, of those early drivers was just crazy. The sheer mental and physical exhaustion and long stints behind the wheel at high speed, and like you say, in all weather conditions, and in the day and at night. It's just amazing.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
but I wonder if they knew any different. I mean, we're comparing this to an endurance drive. Like if I were to drive down to you in California, I mean, it would be It would be a road trip, full of beef jerky and chips. No big deal. But that's what we're used to now. For them, this is just how race cars were.
Yeah, that was the job. So, yeah, given all of that, I'm glad you mentioned, by the way, that you had all these photographs and drawings and stuff, because, I mean, where does one even begin to replicate something? It is a complex machine. You have to get the math right. The dimensions need to be exact. So where did you source all this material?
Well, so this is a customer car. So this was the first customer car I did. So this car's kind of got an interesting story. And so this one I built it sort of from scratch, but it had a lot of stuff to start with. So the customer had been collecting parts for it for a long time, maybe 15 years in the UK, and had work done. It kind of started as one thing and then was taken apart and worked into something else. And then, and then life happens. And he finally found me. He had this pile of parts, this pile of old fiberglass bodywork that had been sourced from different places. So, of course, none of it fit together perfectly. He had a half-finished chassis and then just boxes and boxes of parts and bits. And so he wasn't sure what he was going to do with all of this, or if it was just money that had been lost over the years. And so he finally found me after seeing pictures of the 206 and approached me and asked if I would be interested in making it a reality. And so originally we were just talking about the bodywork, about taking all that original old fiberglass bodywork and creating molds and making carbon fiber bodywork. And I was thought, okay, yeah, I could do this kind of evenings and weekends. I had just finished the 206, so I had time. I didn't have another project lined up right away. And then, I went and talked to my wife about it, and she's like, that would be kind of interesting, kind of neat. And then he came back to me a couple days later, and the guy that he was planning to finish the chassis had hurt his back and wasn't able to do that anymore. And so he talked to me about that and said, who am I going to find to do a chassis? And so originally I thought, I don't know, maybe I'll try to think of somebody. And so again, I talked to my wife about it, and she looked at me kind of with a dumb look, and she's like, you love building chassis. What is wrong with you? Go call him back, build the car, quit your job, and start building cars. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. That would be great. So yeah, I called him back and said, all right, look, I'm I'm interested in doing it, and maybe this is something I just start doing. And so I talked to my brother. I was working with my brother at the time and doing cabinetry. And so I talked to him, and he said, yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely the direction your life should go. You have my blessing. Totally, quit. I'll figure it out on my end and start building cars. So here we are.
Well, that's what I told you too. I mean, this is your calling in life. I can't get over how skilled you are and how you're problem solving. And I've said this before. I think we talked about this on during your first appearance, but there's a fearlessness about you that is just so admirable. So I love it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, taking on a project of this magnitude, it's scary, right? I mean, I'm sure that there are times when you're like, oh boy, how am I going to solve this problem? And it's pretty tough, but
yeah. I mean, it's kind of half and half. It's hard to explain. I mean, there is a point of bravery there, I guess, but there's also a point of ignorance, I think, too. I mean,
you don't know what you're getting into. So.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and that's good. If we all knew exactly what we were getting into, I mean, maybe we wouldn't even get out of bed in the mornings, right?
That's true.
So yeah, I guess there's a part of it that's stupidity or faith or, and then of course there is the part of it that's just bravery of, well, they figured it out back then. I don't see why I can't.
Well, and believing in yourself, and that's really the key. You know who you are, you know what your capabilities are, but you're also pushing the envelope with every build, right? You're actually expanding your skill set, which is very cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, then
you're static.
You're kind of stuck, and I don't want that, right?
Right. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about this 206 Dino Spider that you built, because that came between. Actually, you know what we should do? Let's go back to the Tipo 156 Sharknose.
Okay.
So just so people understand the lineage here, they can get oriented. The Sharknose Ferrari was the world champion car in 1961, driven by Phil Hill famously, and it had a distinctive shark nose. It was a mid-engine car, and those cars were destroyed by Ferrari after they were raced.
Yeah, in 1963.
Right, and there's a whole drama behind that, which
yes,
we don't need to get into right now. But so because they were ordered destroyed by Enzo, and there's been rumors that maybe there's some parts still out there, and that maybe there's one genuine car still out there, but it's always been sort of an apparition.
Yeah, it's all lore.
It's lore.
Yeah.
And so what better car to replicate than the Sharknose? So that was an amazing build that you did. And then the next car in line was the 206 Dino Spider, right? Which was that's a replica of a Targa Florio car, right?
Yeah, it raced privately. So I'm not a historian. Maybe I should be on these cars, but I'm not really a historian. But I more just kind of see something I love and need to have it, so I build it. But yeah, so the 206, they built 18 of them. This was a 1966 car, and I believe they built 18 between 66 and 68. Again, don't quote me on that. But this one, I think in 1969, got chassis number 22, got rebodied into a Spider. So got the roof cut off, got a full new body. And again, I was scrolling on the internet one day looking at my next project, or, just adventuring, I guess. And just stumbled across a photo, and it stopped me dead in my tracks. It had the front end of a P4 with the nice big swooping fenders. It had some beautiful 206 scoops on the rear hips of it, and then it had an open tail similar to a 917. It was just, everything about it was absolutely fantastic. I mean, if a 330 P4 and a 917 had a baby, it would be 206 SP chassis number 22.
Yeah, it's incredible. The original car still exists.
Yes. The original car is in a private collection in England, and it hasn't been seen. The photos that I found, the couple photos I found on the web, were from an auction. It came up at Bombs Auctions, I think in 2014 or 2017, and those were some of the photos I found. So originally I had maybe 10 photos that I started working from, and maybe 2 original black and white photos from the 60s. And that was all. That was all I had. And then a ways along, a guy who's become a friend with Bombs Auctions, he messaged me and he says, "Hey, I took those photos. I can send you the originals if you like." So he sent me about 35 original photos with really good quality, and that helped a ton. Then I was able to actually see close-ups of the interior and other areas that I wasn't able to tell from the couple grainy photos that I had off the web.
When people hear Dino related to Ferrari, you have to immediately think V6.
Yeah. So this car had a 2-liter V6, so hence 206. And again, to get my hands on an original 2-liter V6, I mean, I could have out of Europe. But again, the cost is really high. Parts not really available, especially in North America. I mean, where am I going to find parts for this? Who am I going to find to work on if something goes wrong? Even myself. I mean, and at the end of the day, a basic 206 that let's say you'd find one in a Fiat or something like that. I mean, it's going to make like 112 horsepower, if that, right? Whereas these cars, I think, had 230, something like that. So So what I opted for something that was going to be reliable, modern, and still respectable. So in this, I put a VQ35HR, which is a Nissan engine. Similar, it's the same engine they were putting in the 350Zs.
Okay.
In the late 2000s.
There you go. Compact, reliable, great parts support.
Yeah, lots of power for what it is. Really good power, really reliable. I did a lot of research on V6s, different V6s, to find what kind of engines had common problems. And these kept coming back as just a really good, high revving, good power, very reliable, very few problems, and fairly respectable.
Now, how about getting power to the wheels? How'd you do that?
So the transaxle in this is actually from a Volkswagen Passat. So late 90s, early 2000s Volkswagen Passat, they had a longitudinally mounted four-cylinder, or the 1.8T, longitudinally mounted front-wheel drive. So, which I found was really interesting, because you've got this little tiny, lightweight transaxle. And so to make that work, I had a friend who worked for a 3D scanning place. And so he came over with a fancy 3D scanner, and we 3D scanned the bell housing of both of them. And then he dropped it into CAD and found center and basically just mated them together and made a file, and I sent it away to get cut.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then obviously it wasn't that simple, I guess I should say. There was I had to modify every single thing, all the way from the little needle bearing and the nose bearing, all the way to the fork, to the clutch, to, I think I modified every single piece in between. So it wasn't as easy as I make it sound, I guess, but they fit. I made them work.
Yeah, but I marvel at the technological tools that are available to you today. That's something that 20 years ago, like, that wouldn't be possible.
Yeah. Well, and I think about this all the time I couldn't have done this 20 years ago. Or maybe I could have, but it would have been way harder, way more costly. I mean, I definitely couldn't have pulled it off in a year and a half like
Right.
I did on the 206 20 years ago. I mean, just the access to materials and the technology we have today that's just flooding out is crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's also giving new life to cars that have been off the road, cars that maybe, parts are impossible to find. I'm talking about like really old cars, or very rare cars of very, very low numbers. Now you can CAD it and 3D print it, and you can, get that unobtainium part back on the car.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to me that you can take a part from some really old car that's unobtainable, essentially 3D scan it, 3D print it, cast it, and machine a new part from an actual casting.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's amazing.
So the Dino was built by you, for you. That wasn't a customer car.
Right. Yeah. This car is just built for myself.
And you still have it, right?
Yep.
Are you going to keep that one?
I don't know. I mean, I can't keep them all forever. Right.
Well, you sold the Sharknose to a guy in the UK, right?
That went down to Florida.
Oh, Florida. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the Sharknose went down to Florida, and then when it sold, the 206 was just before paint. So I never actually got a photo of them finished side by side, which is too bad. But
maybe someday.
I know. Yeah. So, but yeah, then this car was finished maybe a month or two after that. And yeah, I've just been driving it and enjoying it. And someday I'll sell it to make room to build something else, whether for myself or maybe I need more room for a customer car or something like that. But for the time being, I just keep it and enjoy it. And as long as it's not in my way, I'll hold on to it.
Have there been things that you need to sort out once it's built? I mean, inevitably, you've got to fiddle with stuff just to make it just right. But overall, like, has it been fairly trouble-free?
You know what? It's been fantastic. It's as far as like working bugs out of it and things, it really hasn't had any. I mean, obviously one or two within the first week or two of driving it, but nothing major. I mean, outside of you pop a fuse and then realize, I had some wiring wrong and throw a new fuse in, redo a few circuits or something. But outside of that, I mean, it's had no bugs really, almost not at all.
No, that's good. And I think that's credit to you for you do. It seems like you do meticulous planning on all this stuff.
That's a hard one. Kind of yes, and kind of no. I mean, similar to the fear thing, right? Or the bravery. There is planning, but at the same time, you have to just throw caution to the wind and just go for it as well. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little bit of both.
All right, so you've built these two cars, the Sharknose and the Dino. You kind of worked it out with this new client on the 412. Were there lessons on the first two cars that really made the third car maybe easier, a smoother build? I mean...
Yeah, I think so for sure. I would say especially the bodywork of the 206 and doing large molds definitely helped in knowing areas that I needed to pay closer attention to, or how flanges would overlap and how the doors would work and close, and a lot of that kind of stuff definitely helped, having learned that from the 206 and the Sharknose as well.
With carbon fiber, I always thought that you needed an autoclave and you needed like vacuum and all of that to get the carbon right.
It depends. So carbon can be done. It could be done wet layup, which is what I'm essentially doing because of my space. It depends on the resins or the epoxies that you use. If I had an autoclave, which an autoclave is essentially a giant pressure chamber with heat. So what you would do in a perfect world, so let's say I was making Formula One bodies, like proper Formula One bodies, what you would do, these days they would use a pre-preg carbon, which is a carbon cloth that's been pre-impregnated with a perfect amount of epoxy. And because you want the epoxy is really what adds the weight. So ideally, again, depending on what you're doing, ideally you want 60% carbon and 40% resin. And so and then you can get all sorts of different ones. But so you would take this pre-preg, line a mold with it, then you would cover it with a vacuum bag and bag it, pull vacuum down on it, and then you would put it in a pressure clave or an autoclave, and that will create heat. So the heat will cure it. And also, you would then fill that with pressure because you can only get so much atmospheric vacuum. Whereas if you add pressure to it, now you're doubling down, you're compounding that, and it will really, really, really take that shape that you wanted to take while curing it. And then being cured under heat will give the most chemical structure you're going to get out of that epoxy. So for what I'm doing, I'm essentially doing it very similar to fiberglass. There are parts that I'll vacuum bag, just simply vacuum bag. If they're just smaller complicated parts. But generally just large pieces, I'll wet that out very similar to fiberglass, and then I'll use foam rollers and different materials to pull out any excess resin I have to try and achieve a really good ratio of carbon to resin.
Very painstaking, sort of, long, arduous process, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely stressful because carbon's not cheap and epoxy's not cheap. But yeah, you take your time and you plan it out and you got to be ready for screw ups. I mean, you got to be ready for when you think you can get that tight in a corner and you just can't. And suddenly you're stressing out. You've got a few hours with the epoxy, with the epoxy to get it to do what you want it to do. But I mean, nothing ever works out perfectly, so you gotta account for that, right?
Well, just the idea of accounting for like the dimension of the mold, and then laying your carbon over that. Dimensionally, you have to think about, there's a 16th of an inch or a 32nd of an inch difference. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. Well, and again, what I'm doing, this is the beauty of doing older cars, recreating 60s cars, is that they weren't perfect. So if I were trying to reproduce something or create a really modern car, right? Let's say I took an AI rendering and was going to make a really fancy, really modern car with perfect lines. That would be really hard to do because it needs to be perfect. People expect it to be perfect. So one of the beauties of working with 60s cars is that they were never perfect to begin with. And so there is a lot of forgiveness there. And honestly, in my opinion, that's what gives them beauty. I love that those old aluminum cars were not perfect. I love that they had ripples. I love that the gaps weren't perfect. I love that they were covered in scratches and they just made them work. I love that. So I mean, that's very forgiving for me.
So the 412P that you have replicated, it started life as a 330 P3 in 1966. It ran at Le Mans. It was driven by Mike Parks and Ludovico Scarfiati. And then it returned to the factory after racing at Le Mans. I think, I don't know where they placed, but then it was upgraded to 412P specification. But Ferrari did kind of not a sneaky thing, but
it's kind of sneaky. I don't know if you would call it upgraded or downgraded.
Right. Well, so explain.
So, the 330 cars were fuel injected in 67. And then the privateer cars, the 412Ps, the ones that weren't works cars, they left them carbureted. And so the idea being that they didn't want to have the privateer cars beating out their works cars.
So they had a little bit of a disadvantage over the factory cars. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. So typical Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
But
so this car in its livery is replicating the 412P 0848 from the 1967 Monza 1,000 kilometer.
And Nino Vaccarella drove this car. Mm-hmm. Among other people, I think. And Nino, they called Nino the flying headmaster. He was a Sicilian and raced the Targa Florio many times, and he knew every inch of that course. He drove it in his own personal car. I think he had like a little Fiat Berlina or something. And but the reason they called him the flying headmaster was he owned and operated like a technical school. I can't remember. It was like clerical or something. If you wanted to be a bookkeeper, you could go to Nino's school.
Oh, interesting.
And learn how to be a bookkeeper. So he was like, he was the headmaster. Anyway, Nino was like such a hero to his fellow Sicilians, right?
That's hilarious.
Racing in the Targa.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But, that's quite the side gig.
Totally, right? Anyway, so interesting to me. But all right, so that's the car that you've replicated. And inevitably, the question becomes, well, how do we finish it? Like, is it going to be pristine and beautiful? How are you going to represent it? So what was the thought process there?
So this is something I've always thought about. I mean, you see these cars that have been restored, and this is very common of old race cars. I mean, they were never beautiful. Like, they were beautiful in their imperfections. They were beautiful from a distance, but they were never perfect. But then, so typical of a restoration or a recreation, that people will perfect all of those. So they'll take out all those imperfections, which to me, you kind of lose the soul of it when you do that. When you have perfect paint and perfect gaps and perfect panels, it takes something away from it. And so with this car, again, it's not perfect. It's a replica built in a garage, right? Because of that, talking with the customer, I suggested to him, I said, what if we patinaed the car and made it as raced? And I said, if you had two cars on the lawn, two cars parked on the lawn, both the same car, one was perfectly pristine and the other looked like it had just come from the race, which one are you going to walk up to first and ogle over?
Oh, definitely the race car.
Of course, right? Mm. Of course. And so talking with him about that, at the end of the day, it's a replica. It's not real. Anybody who knows anything about these cars knows that you're unlikely to ever see a real one in real life because they're so valuable and there's only 4 of them. So why not? Why not do that? And most people don't, even with replicas, because by the time you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to build something like this, nobody would ever think about doing that. You could never justify ruining that paint job or ruining the car to beat it up like that. Well, I mean, why not? Why not?
Yeah, definitely more interesting that way. And,
and you can always fix it. I mean, let's say if you really wanted to, you can always repaint it. It's just paint. At the end of the day, it's just panels. It's just a car. Why would you not?
The other thing, too, is the shinier it is, the more pristine it is, the less you maybe want to use it. Like, the more nervous you become.
Right. Well, I said that to him, too. I said, because, I mean, I've wiped the car down a million times here, of course. And I told him, wiping this car is kind of a nightmare. It's got a lot of curves. It's got a lot of flanges. It's got a lot of rivets. Which is an interesting thing we can talk about here in a minute. But it's kind of a hard car to wipe down. It's a hard car to keep clean. So how much nicer is it to have something that you can just get in and drive? You don't have to worry about it. It's so much more. It's so relieving. Having the Sharknose here, when the Sharknose had its beautiful clear-coated paint job and it was flawless, it was a nightmare to have here. I was so scared of it all the time.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So we touched on carbon a little bit, and you explained some of the intricacies of working with carbon, but there's a lot more materials. There's aluminum, there's steel, you mentioned rivets. Talk about the rivets, because I don't think this occurs to people necessarily when they're thinking about building a car.
Well, with this car, some of the rivets on this car for me are actually functional. They're actually holding stuff, but a lot of them aren't, of course. They're just meant to replicate
the original. In other words,
yeah,
the original car was aluminum, therefore the panels are riveted together. But on your build, that's not necessary. But you still have to replicate the look.
That's right. But some of the rivets are functional. They're they're holding parts and things together. But I got to use steel rivets because aluminum and carbon. There's actually metallurgy kind of between them, and they'll react together over time. Not right away, but over time, similar to aluminum and steel. Over time, will corrode.
Galvanic corrosion.
That's right, galvanic corrosion.
Right.
So carbon will have that effect. What I think is really interesting, though, about the original cars with all the rivets, and I said earlier, these cars were kind of built on Friday, painted on Saturday, raced on Sunday, garbage on Monday. And I really wonder about this because no other cars from Ferrari that I can really think of that era were covered in rivets the way these were. So I really wonder about that and why that was. I mean, this car has hundreds and hundreds of rivets on it, but none of the others do. And even the race cars, I mean, the 206s didn't. The Sharknose had rivets, even in 61. I mean, the Sharknose had rivets down the fuel tanks and around the window flanges, but really nowhere else. So I wonder why. I wonder why that was the case with these cars. They were just covered in rivets. And that's the late 60s.
Right. Very interesting. I don't know the answer myself. Someone out there will know. So if you know the answer to this question, hit us up on Instagram. By the way, Brandon, your Instagram handle is How Is That Street Legal? So people should give you a follow over there.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So, what's working with the rivets? Can the rivets crack or compress or damage the carbon?
They can. Yeah. If I'm using, you do have to be careful, especially near the edges of things, right? Because they do expand almost all the way through the range of the rivet itself. I had a box. I wish I had more of these, but I had a box of these special rivets that would kind of flower. Instead of just pulling like a regular rivet, they would actually cut. It would cut the back of the rivet and then it would flower it and then it would break the head off. Those were really awesome. I only had a couple hundred of them and I use them kind of in specific places, but boy, do I wish I had 10,000 of those. I'm going to have to look for some more. Or even a Riv Nut. To be putting Riv Nuts in carbon is something I've done on this car to make things disassemblable really nicely and easily. But yeah, I'll make up little test pieces and things like that.
I love Riv Nuts, by the way.
Oh, Riv Nuts are the greatest thing. I didn't know about those until a few years ago. And because, again, my dad, I learned a lot of this stuff just from the tools my dad would have in his little 1-car garage. And so I just I knew about the things that we had growing up, right? And then one day I discovered Riv Nuts, and I was like, Dad, have you heard of this? Have you seen this? And he's like, oh yeah, I think I have one of those in a cabinet somewhere. Like, what? You had one of these all these years ago, and I never knew about it. It's going to make my life so much easier for so many years.
They are really cool. So
yeah, they are awesome.
For people who aren't familiar with Riv Nuts, imagine you need to put a bolt in something, a panel, whatever it is, and maybe your access to the backside isn't great because, you need a nut and a bolt, right? And a washer and all that. Well, if you drill a hole in that workpiece and install a riv nut, it's solid in there. It's like a rivet, but it's threaded and hollow. So you can thread a bolt right in there and you're done. Like they're so elegant. They're really
they're
super
awesome.
useful.
They're the greatest thing of all time.
Yeah. Zeus fasteners and riv nuts and Clecos. They're like my 3 favorite. If we're going to geek out on fasteners, those are my 3 favorite.
I got to disagree with you with this Zeus. I hate Zeus fasteners.
Really?
Oh yeah. They're a nightmare to install. I hate them.
Well,
maybe that's just me getting them lined up. I hate them.
I haven't actually had to install them, but on a car, I think they're just cool.
When they work awesome.
Yeah.
Setting them up to work awesome sucks.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to try it sometime, and maybe my opinion will change.
You'll regret it. Don't
worry. Is it tough to stay motivated, especially it's late at night and you're trying to figure out how to mate 2 mechanical components together, maybe, and like you were talking about the needle bearings earlier and getting into the minutia of the transaxle. I mean, for me, it's tough to stay motivated on a project sometimes when you're working on like sort of the monotony and like the unexciting portions of a project.
That I can't say that those days don't exist for sure, but overall, it's really not hard to stay motivated. I'd love it. I mean, I love coming out here. Coming out to the garage and opening the door and seeing that project and knowing what it's going to be. It takes a lot of that away, right? Like a lot of the slogging through, it takes that away. And I've told, my friend always bugs me about this because, and I'm going to offend some people here, but I hate square body Chevys. I don't know why. To me, like I grew up when they were work trucks. My dad had them as a work truck. I don't find them attractive. And so for me, if I were to come out here every day and to see a square body Chevy that I was trying to put airbags on or something, like that would be horrible for me. I would hate that. I would lose interest and motivation right away. But to come out here and see this and to know to work on this and what I'm kind of doing with older Italian cars, it's exciting. Everything about it is exciting. Yes, there's those days that are monotonous and frustrating, and you got to take a day, just go in the house and just take a break. But overall, no, I seem to have endless motivation for it.
Okay, well, good. I mean, I'm glad. For the record, I love me a square body.
See, I said I'm going to offend some people.
I'm not real hot on the bullnose Ford pickups, but square bodies are okay in my book. But yeah, I probably lost a listener or 2 just now. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, motivation is key, and that's great. That's great that you can see the big picture and yet like stay focused on the task at hand. That's really important.
I think that's what it is, though. It's the big picture for me. Like I work fairly fast, whether that's work ethic or whether that's just my magic garage. I don't know, but these projects don't take me years and years and years to do, and so that's very motivating too, right? To know that every time I come out here, it's going to be productive.
It's also cool that you get to work out of your home.
Yeah, that's been nice.
You're there for your family if they need you, and
yeah, I mean, and that's been kind of the greatest thing about this year, especially for having kind of left my job, and doing this as a job, which I don't consider it a job really. I'm kind of retired. I kind of feel like, but it's the ability to be there and to take a break. I can go inside and eat lunch. I can, if I run out of welding gas or I'm running out of welding gas, I can just go into town and fill up welding gas. It's not a matter of like planning, like, okay, well, we're going to be in this side of town, next week, and then I can kind of take it in after work and then come home and rush hour traffic, and then I can carry on next week. Like, no, I can just go and do that right now.
By the way, you live outside of Calgary, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So
a little suburb of Calgary.
Yeah. So just give people a visual of, rural Canada, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful country up there too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Just gorgeous. And lots of good roads for you to test these cars on.
Yeah. So the 412P isn't running. So when I give it back to the client here in a little bit, it's not running. So in the beginning, I said, what I'll do, because this is kind of a test for me as well, right? I mean, he's putting faith in me and I'm putting faith in him. And so I said, I'll give you a year of my life and get you to a roller. I will give you back a full roller with a driveline mounted, essentially ready for a fuel system, wiring, and engine management. And so that's what I've done. And so he'll do all those last bits on his end. And then we've talked about flying me out when the time comes that it's ready to start and go for a test drive around the block.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun.
Yeah.
Be sure to get a bunch of video on that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm glad you mentioned this aspect of it, because I was going to ask you about managing customer expectations and, setting a timeline. And I imagine it's probably kind of hard to set a timeline on something like this, particularly when you're fabricating everything, right? So, but you set it at a year.
Yeah, I looked at the project, and again, some of this is the bravery, some of this is the foolishness to look at it and just think, I think I could do that in a year. And I have done it in just under a year. But yeah, I think building the other cars, I kind of have gotten to know myself and know what I can do with my time and my abilities, and then kind of give a timeline.
Well, it's interesting because I was just listening to another podcast, and I can't remember who or what it was, but they were talking about sort of announcing to the world, our company is going to do this in this amount of time. And
and then it never works out.
Well, how it can be risky to do that, but it actually manifests the goal, right? In some cases.
Yeah. Well, it gives you a goal. It gives you a deadline and something you have to meet, right? And so for this, I mean, sometimes you'll see it where somebody will have a big shop and you take your project in, or you commission the shop to build you something, and there's not really a set cost. There's an estimate, and it says, they say it would probably cost, this many hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this, and maybe it'll take this long. And they say, okay, and they leave it with them, and then they just start paying them every month. They just start getting bills and paying bills every month, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And they're like, who knows what's happening with the car? And then the costs overrun and the timeline overruns. And what was supposed to be a couple $100,000 is now many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they still don't have it. You hear it all the time. And especially too, I mean, doing cabinetry work before, I mean, I'd see builders do this, home builders do this all the time, right? And it always takes longer. It always costs more. So to be able to give somebody an actual timeline and an actual cost and say, if it takes me this much time, it will cost this much. And if it takes me longer, well, then I guess I'm working for free.
Right. Yeah. And as long as I guess you are communicating well and you both have as long as you're both on the same page, right?
Yeah. Well, and for me too, I mean, I don't plan to be rich. I do this because I love it, and this year has been great. This year has provided so much freedom of my time and so little stress. I mean, the lifestyle it's provided for me this year has just been amazing. Like I say, it literally feels like I'm retired with young kids. It feels so good. And I get to do what I enjoy. I have no overhead, other than the lights and the lights in the garage kind of thing. I have no employees that I have to manage. Any screw ups are my screw ups, right? So I don't know. That's worth so much more to me than having tons and tons of money or planning to charge someone tons and tons of money. I mean, the car, these aren't cheap, right? Of course, they're still handmade cars. It's not cheap, but I don't have to charge a shop's rate to do it. I don't have any overhead. I don't have any employees. I don't have crazy costs behind me.
Do you know what your next project is yet? Do you have something lined up?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So the next project is going to be a Lancia 037.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a pretty good one.
That's very different from what you've done so far, because the cars that you've done to this point are very curvy and swoopy, and the Lancia is very geometric. Yeah.
It'll be an interesting project. But again, the project itself might not be as beautiful to walk out and see and as motivating in that sense as this is. But knowing that when it's done, we'll get to rip it at full throttle and jump train tracks with it and stuff and treat it like the originals, that's going to be great.
So awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to build that thing to be abused hard.
And this is another client that approached you?
Yeah.
Cool. You don't have to, obviously, you don't have to disclose anything particular, but where's the client based?
He's here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So that'll be interesting, because if he's nearby, that means he's going to be able to be more closely involved than your previous client.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and another thing too is I like the transparency. I mean,
yeah.
Like I've said to a lot of people who have talked to me about doing cars in the future for them, is I've got nothing to hide.
Right.
There's I've got nothing to hide. I've got no secrets. I'm an open book, and I'm trying to think where I was going with that.
Well, I mean, the reason I say is I think it's interesting because the guy who ordered the 412P is in the UK, so he can't see he can't just pop in and see the progress. But
right, yeah, that's where I was going. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I like the communication. I with this client, I'm talking to him or sending him texts. Like we talk at least once a week, and then sending him texts almost daily and photos almost daily of what I'm doing, and to show, I'm not just taking your money and then sitting on a beach somewhere, and then just busting it all off in the last 2 months
right.
of our contract, right? Which again, that's when these big shops, you start paying these big shops, and when you phone and you only get the person at the front desk, and you're trying to talk to somebody and nobody really gives you answers, but meanwhile you've paid somebody hundreds of thousands of dollars that's just sitting there, and they've got your money and your car. I mean, how stressful must that be?
Oh,
I would be losing my mind in that kind of a scenario.
I have heard the horror stories of people having to go to a shop and rescue their car that's like sitting in a corner, partially disassembled, covered in dust. Actually, I've been in that position myself. It's no fun. I had a guy that was painting a car for me, and it was a Land Rover. This is many years ago. And I brought him every body panel separated from the car, because I was restoring the chassis and drivetrain at that point. So I thought, while I'm doing all this mechanical work, I'm going to send all of the body panels out for paint.
Of course.
And in the 2 or 3 months that he had it, which was pretty ridiculous, but I wasn't necessarily upset about that timeline, because I was working on stuff on my own. But in the 2 or 3 months that he had it, he went through like 5 different painters, and the panels weren't all painted on the same day, so there were mismatched colors. And then when I finally went back to reclaim everything, he tried to extort more money out of me. It was pretty ugly.
Why is it always the case with painters? I got to tell you, I have never once, I've been around this a while and going to car shows and things like that, talking to guys. I have never once heard a single paint story or bodywork story where someone says, I found this guy and he got great reviews and I took my stuff there. He told me it was going to be a month. He told me the cost. And then a month later I went and picked it up and it was the actual cost. I have never heard that story. Never, ever, ever have I heard that story when it comes to paint and bodywork.
It's so true. But,
right?
It's a lot of, I mean, it's the same story though with tradesmen. Like you hire somebody to do drywall or, put a new floor in or whatever. I mean, good help is really hard to find.
It is.
The really good ones are booked up. You can't get them. The ones that have a lot of open time on their schedule are the ones.
Yeah, there's often a reason for that.
Right. You kind of want to avoid. That's a bad sign. But
yeah,
I had another friend who paid a guy a bunch of money to do a Resto mod for him. After a year, he discovered nothing had been done.
Oh man.
And they had to go rescue all of the car and all of the parts. It got pretty ugly. That Resto mod is almost done. And it's taken a long time, but the guy who's doing it is the right guy to do it. It's just he's got multiple projects he's managing. But
yeah, well, and sometimes it takes a bit to find that guy.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Unfortunately.
Definitely. A project that I would love to see you do, and if you're interested in doing something on spec, that's risky, because you got to find the client after the fact. But I would love to see you do a Jaguar XJ13.
Oh, is that I'm not so good with Jags. Is that the
sports racing prototype, 1966, I think, V12 mid-engine, and it wasn't going to be competitive, so they kind of put it in a corner, and then Norman Dewis was a very famous works driver for Jaguar, and I think he crashed it in the early 70s. Again, the wreckage was put into a corner at the factory, and I think it's been rebuilt or something. But
yeah, because I've seen either a rebuild or some replicas.
Right,
and this is the car that has it has perspex over the engine.
Right. Yeah.
Why is it that as soon as you put perspex or glass over the engine, that it just makes it that much more awesome?
I know. It's
any car. You put glass over that engine and it's amazing.
Ferrari F40, perfect example, right? Louvered perspex.
Yep.
So cool. Anyway, an XJ13 replica would be great because you can find a Jaguar V12. You can find you can find what you need mechanically for that car.
That's true.
And it would also be one of the other things I want to mention about what you do is you're not trying to pass anything off as the quote, the real thing. And you're recreating cars again that are unobtainium and priceless. And there's something very cool about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. I mean, of course, nothing I'm producing is real. And I never claim that it is.
Right.
And I think somebody would be foolish to claim that, any recreation is really the real thing. But like you say, I mean, these cars are unobtainable. And so the fact that I can try and bring these to life, even with modern flair or small changes, I love that. I love it. And also to recreate them with modern reliability, that you can actually own it without having to also own a team of mechanics like the originals.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine owning an original Formula car and having your team of mechanics there to bring it up to temperature in order to safely even start it and spend an hour watching the oil pressure and on and on and on. I mean, that's no fun.
No. The cars you're building are usable, and that's what's so great. They look the business, but they can also perform reliably. So, Brandon, if somebody listening out there kind of wants to do their own thing, do what you're doing essentially, where do you start?
First, I would say you can totally do what I'm doing. I mean, there's a talent side of it, and there's a skill side of it, and maybe there is some God-given talent there. And everybody has different talents, of course, but the skill side of it, for sure, anybody can learn to do what I'm doing and learn to weld, learn to use a grinder, you learn carbon. And so I would say first, don't be scared to learn. Don't be scared to put your neck out and try things. For younger people, I would say, well, for anybody, I guess, I would say start small. Start with, don't jump into some really great big project. Like probably something like this is not the kind of thing you just jump into as your first car. But, start with a go-kart, a mini bike, working on your car in your driveway, of course. I tell young people too to buy tools because I get this question a lot. I tell young people to buy tools. That would be probably one of the best investments you can make when you're young is buy tools and learn to use them, because it'll save you money down the road. It's satisfying. It's self-fulfilling. And if you own tools and can use them, that can feed a family when life gets into a pin.
Yeah, and I like what you said about starting small. I think a good place to start would be, let's say you find kind of a clapped out Mazda Miata, something like that, where there's some performance potential there, and it's a manageable size car. It's not like overcomplicated or exotic, but you take that, you get it back on the road, you maybe set it up for track days, something like that, where you can learn some fabrication skills, maybe put some rollover protection in it and lighten it and put some performance parts on it. That would be a great first project.
Absolutely. Talk to anybody at a track and I'll bet they'll tell you can have as much fun in a Miata as you can have in a new Porsche GT3 RS.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah. And also the cost of entry is relatively low compared to, anything European.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Another thing I would say too is watch out for project creep. That is one thing. There's like a fine line here to get into something. So let's say a Miata. That's a good example. To get into it, to learn and to start racing it and things like that. Absolutely. Great platform. But there's a fine line between getting into it to have fun and where you start to put too much money into it and too much time, where you could be putting into something else that's more worth it. So when I was 21, 22, I had my very first car I bought with my own money was an 89 Dodge Caravan with a 2.5 turbo, which is hilarious. And we would take it to the drag strip and I slowly built it up. And eventually it was like 300 horsepower and, big whole set turbo and giant intercooler and injectors and ECU and all that. And then eventually I looked at it and realized this is a minivan.
Right.
It has zero value.
Right.
Right. As a vehicle, it has zero value. And so I gutted it, put all that same stuff into a Dodge Omni and raced that for another year or two. And again, it came to a point where it was just a Dodge Omni. It has no value. It's worthless. This is $1,000 car that I'm investing thousands of hours and thousands of dollars into. And it got to a point where I had to stop. And I thought, if I keep going, I can't afford to do this anymore, or it's not worth doing with that platform. And that's when I sold that car, and that's when I bought the body for a 1927 Ford and started building my first rat rod.
That thing is so cool.
Yeah, thanks. But that's I think one of the things too of being young, which I think it's a double-edged sword, because so let's say like the 32 Ford or a Honda Civic. These are cars that were handed down from your mom, right?
Okay.
Like in wartime, like a 32 Ford or whatever, everybody had one of these because they came back from war, and that was just an old car by that point. And so you just got it from your mom, and of course you just work with what you have. Exactly the same thing as a Honda Civic in the 90s, right? You got it from your mom, and that becomes your hot rod eventually. And those cars, you need those cars, right? The Miata, like the society, the car society, you need those cars. But there comes a time where you start to put too much money into them and too much time, where you could be putting money and time into something more valuable, more worthwhile.
No, it's a very good point. Although I have to say, if the Dodge Omni was good enough for Carroll Shelby, it should be good enough for anyone.
I wonder about that. I wonder if he was just selling cars.
Oh, dude,
I honestly think he was just selling cars.
He was going straight to the bank. Listen.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, there's a lot to admire about Carroll Shelby, but at the end of the day, he was interested in the green, and everybody,
for sure,
everybody knows it. So.
Yeah, he did some cool things, but when it came to licensing his name to stuff, I think it was just that.
Exactly right. I mean, the guy would charge $20 for autographs on the glove box door of your Mustang or your Cobra or whatever. So, anyway,
but we'd still pay it today, wouldn't we?
Well, of course we would. Yeah, of course. Well, Brandon Hegedus, thank you once again for being on the show. Long time coming. I've been wanting to have you on to talk about your latest and greatest. And if people want to follow you, you're at How Is That Street Legal on Instagram. That's really the place to find your work, right?
Yeah. Right now it is. I'm working on a website right now. Also working on an actual proper business name, and then eventually, when all of that gets solidified and figured out, then I'll probably figure out how to switch that Instagram over and not lose everybody in the process.
Right on.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man. I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work, and I'll put links in the show notes. So, Brandon Hegedus, thanks for coming back on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Maurice. I love being here.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, share the show with your friends. You can reach me at horsepowerheritage.com. Just click on the contact button at the top of the webpage, and that'll take you where you need to go. There's more for you to check out on Instagram and YouTube, and I will see you back here on Wednesday, November 6th for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.